Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Experts in America series produced by the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center. My name is Pepe Zhang. I'm the Senior Fellow at the Center, and today it is my pleasure to welcome two experts to talk about some of the very critical issues within this economic time context we're facing globally, and of course, specifically in Latin America and the Caribbean. From the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, we're committed to being a bridge between the public and private sectors. We are a policy shop, of course, but our collaboration and partnership with private sector partners and key stakeholders within the private sector have proven to be very useful to think through issues critical for the region's economic recovery and, of course, long-term prosperity. Now, specifically, the economic context we're facing in the region, looking at 2020, 2023 is a challenging one. The IMF projection, the latest projection looked at 1.7% for this year, which represents deceleration from last year. Some debt challenges, some inflation challenges. And investment attraction has been a critical issue for the region in the past 5 to 10 years. We haven't seen a significant upward trend in that region. And that's something we need to look at, and certainly an important part, especially when public finances and, of course, other financial resources are being strained, becoming more costly in this current environment. So within this context, again, such a pleasure to welcome two experts from Baker McKenzie, a longstanding partner of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, to talk about the critical issue of investment, specifically franchising. And Kevin Maher and Ximena Couret, it's great to have you with us today. Very much looking forward to your insights. In a quick introduction here, Kevin currently leads the Dallas office international commercial practice group within Baker McKenzie. He has a broad-based business transactional practice focusing on the complex cross-border corporate and commercial contract matters, with especially global brand expansion and international business growth value franchising. So very much relevant to the topic we're covering today. Ximena is a senior associate also in Baker McKenzie's Dallas office, and where she assists clients in realizing their corporate transactional goals. Her practice focuses on corporate and commercial law, including international franchising and distribution matters. And both Ximena and Kevin, including the practice in general, has a focus on Latin America, and they have worked with many brands in the region. So very much, again, looking forward to the practical hands-on insight you guys have on this matter. Now, maybe starting off with a more broad question to you, Kevin. And this question is framed under the context of the economic environment I just mentioned. As countries in Latin America seek investment to stimulate economic growth, why should they consider or prioritizing franchising specifically as an opportunity?
Yeah, thanks, Pepe. It's a great question. And as you mentioned, we spend our day working with different types of brands in various industries that are looking to expand, and we do have a big focus on representing particularly American brands looking to expand into the region, but really working with brands from all over the world who are looking to expand via franchising. And so stepping back, I think if you look at the United States as the example, the United States is really the birthplace of franchising. And I think if you look back look at the economy of the United States from a macro level, over the last century, right? What's really made the U.S. an economic powerhouse has been its middle class, the strength of its middle class. And I think over the last several decades, I think Latin America has become slowly more attractive to brands because there has been some slow but steady growth of the middle class in Latin America. Although over the last few years, we've seen that recede a bit, especially with the pandemic. So I think from if you look at it from a policy standpoint from the Latin American countries, why would you prioritize franchising? And I think what really franchising is at its heart is small business, right? You are allowing local operators to operate a business on their own, but really what you're bringing with it is the know-how and the power of a big international brand, a world-class organization, the training, the support, the supply chain that comes with it. And so, franchising, really what it does in a local economy, again, from a macro perspective, is you're prioritizing small business, you're prioritizing, entrepreneurship, and you're prioritizing economic job creation, really. And that's the key. There was a recent study done by the International Franchise Association that came out last year that showed that in the U.S. That there were over 8.2 million Americans employed in the franchise industry, and it brought nearly $800 billion into the U.S. economy. So, if you overlay that onto, the Latin American economy, really the business format franchising, whether it's a hotel, restaurant, service industry, whatever it is, this business format franchising, it is an accelerator for small business and entrepreneurship. And that's really what the region really needs, is to grow small business, encourage entrepreneurship, and really build out the middle class. And what better way to do that than allowing access to, again, world-class organizations, proven brands who can come in and support local small business to grow, and to grow quickly. Because the studies show franchise businesses are more successful and grow quickly than other from the ground up business. So again, I think prioritizing franchising is really prioritizing growth right in the middle of the economy, which is really promotes long-term stability for the region.
Thank you, Kevin. That's super insightful. And I think something I wanted to highlight here, just to summarize a couple of points you mentioned, franchising specifically as a driver of employment, as a driver of small SME growth. And that latter part, SME growth, that's something that our center has spent a lot of time studying. So certainly looking forward to continue collaboration on that front and see how we can engage you and experts from Baker McKenzie to think about ways to advance this agenda from a policy perspective, but obviously thinking through that, what are some of the practical opportunities and also challenges we need to overcome in this regard. Before we get to that, though, I would like to turn now the question to Ximena. And this is perhaps a bit more of a technical question, but it's so important for us to understand, which is, when we have to compare, for example, the franchising model, of course, the benefits that Kevin has already described to us, how does that compare to other investment or business models, right? And specifically, what are the benefits of pursuing a franchising model as opposed to, let's say, subsidiary acquisition and other business and investment models in the context of Latin America?
Thank you, Pepe. There's three main ways that you can expand your brand internationally. Either direct investment, where you would be using your own funds, a joint venture where you go in at it with somebody else, or you find a third party that will help you implement your commercial strategy. This is where franchising falls. So instead of spending your own funds in things like employment, real estate, maybe too much market research, obtaining licenses, things of that nature that are really kind of on the ground, where you really, as a foreign brand, don't have the knowledge, you would be partnering with a local party that is knowledgeable, that is able to bring that to the table, is able to help you execute and translate your brand to the local market. So that really is a huge benefit of franchising, is that you're partnering with somebody that's on the ground, that's going to bring that knowledge. The other part is it really is a faster way to expand, because you're not doing all of those things. You're not going out and finding the real estate and finding the employees. You really are focusing on the first level, which is your franchisee, and letting them handle the rest. So your funds are going to go into development of intangible, which is your intellectual property, your operations manuals, your system, how is your product made and delivered to a customer, whether it's a good or a service. That's really where you're spending your funds. And you can leverage that much faster than you can leverage some of the other investments like real estate and some of the other things. So from a franchisor's perspective, you really are investing in something that you can more quickly grow and is scalable, and you can expand faster into other markets. In addition, in Latin America, there is at least some common culture. Every country is very different. Every town in every country is very different. But we do have a common culture, a common language for the most part, of course, not including Brazil. But really, once you are able to translate your brand into one country in Latin America, it will be easier for you as a brand to go into other countries. For example, we've helped so many clients go into Mexico as a first port of entry, hotels, restaurants, gyms, you name it. And Mexico is a really great place for American companies. It's the first kind of bridge into Latin America, into unlocking that market where you have a stream of revenue from developing that intangible asset. So it creates the fastest expansion with the least exposure on your balance sheet.
Thank you, Ximena. This is super helpful because we work very closely with Latin American governments, and when we talk to them about some of these issues, of course, we look at this from a host country's perspective. And what you just mentioned from the investor franchisor perspective, that's super valuable, and I think it's something that we love to hear more about, of course, down the road as we continue to work the Baker McKenzie team on some of these issues. Now, another follow-up question on that. We want to be clear-eyed about our analysis. We know that there's tremendous opportunities and benefits, as you just mentioned. But what about some of the risks and challenges? And specifically, to be more solution-oriented, after you tell us about some of these potential risks and challenges, how can we mitigate such risks involved in the franchising model?
It's a great follow-up question. So I think about it in terms of four main challenges. The first and the biggest one is any risk to your brand. That is your asset. That is what you're protecting. That is what you've created. So you don't want somebody else, maybe a franchisee or somebody else, to take that asset that you've created and use it to either against you or not for your benefit. So doing business internationally 101, first thing you do, make a list of countries of where you want to go, file for your trademark. So that's the first thing that you can do to mitigate the risk of anybody taking your IP, your intellectual property. There are some types of intellectual property that you cannot register, such as your know-how, your trade secrets. And so there's other ways of protecting that intellectual property, including, for example, entering into non-disclosure agreements would be a contractual way, but also from a strategy perspective, you don't need to share all of your know-how and all of your trade secrets with every single person in the chain. So make sure that you define what information is critical to share with your franchisees before you enter into a franchise agreement, once you've entered into a franchise agreement, and help them be able to administer that IP as well internally. What information can they share with their employees at the different levels, and make sure that they are under a obligation to enter into non-disclosure agreements with those different employees, particularly at the top levels. There's other things that you can do, including require non-competition obligations on your franchisees and other things to protect your know-how, but that really is the biggest one. The other three, I would say compliance with local laws. Even though you're entering into a new market through a third party and you're not actually doing business there are some laws that you will be subject to. And of course, prime example is franchise laws. There's at least 3 jurisdictions, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, that have franchise laws that you must comply with, even if you're not doing business there directly, but through a franchisee. So spend some time with your attorneys, with your local attorneys, or with your international counsel to make sure that you know what it is that you must comply with. Non-compliance, of course, can lead to termination of franchise agreement, payments of fees, things like that. So just make sure you spend the time. And then another one is franchisee selection. Your franchisees are really going to be your brand ambassadors. They're going to be on the ground with the customers face to face. So you want to make sure that you choose franchisees that represent you, that represent your brand, especially in today's world. Reputational risk is huge. So you want to make sure that you do your due diligence, you know who they are, you interview them, you meet them. Don't just chase the opportunity for the sake of expanding. Know that that can also create a liability if you don't choose properly. From that perspective of choosing a franchisee, there's also certain laws that companies must comply with. So there is some level of legal diligence that you should carry out on your franchisees, and your international counsel can help you with that. And then the last risk is really more operational, making sure your brand translates well to the local market, making sure there's nothing offensive, making sure that it's just going to be well received. So spend time doing some research, and this is one where your franchisee is going to be very valuable because they have that local knowledge. So listen to them and lean on them for this piece, while also striving to maintain, of course, your uniformity and what makes you a brand unique.
This is super helpful, Ximena. I think we really got to get down to some of the nitty-gritty issues that we're looking at from a franchisor's perspective, and all of that should be something that franchisors should consider. And of course, from the host country's perspective, in order to make the countries more attractive, this is something they also need to think about. And that kind of leads me to perhaps the final question, and turning back to you, Kevin. If we have to think about some of these issues that countries need to think about themselves, and I can ask you, what are the main, whether that's legal, regulatory, or other barriers that are holding back franchising in Latin America at the moment? How can we translate this opportunity into reality? Love to hear some of the recommendations or ideas you might have in this regard.
Pepe, we're usually approaching this from the perspective of a brand, and we work with a lot of brands who are looking to expand into Latin America. But we also, our clients are expanding globally. And so when they look at markets, they do look strongly, as we talked about at the beginning, at the middle class. And so when they're looking to Latin America, it's kind of spotty in terms of the strength of the middle class and what markets have a strong middle class and really show opportunity to grow beyond maybe one central city in suburban and exurban areas and things like that. So I think you look at countries like Chile and Colombia that have done well over the last few years and have grown, and some that have receded. Venezuela years ago was a great market for expansion, and obviously that is no longer the case. And so there is a bit, when you look at Latin America from the brand perspective, there's a bit of a chicken and the egg problem in the sense that you need a strong middle class to grow. But as we talked about, prioritizing franchises is important because it's going to help to grow that middle class. And so I think what Latin America needs, a lot of these countries need to do, and a lot of these markets should do, is kind of play to their strengths. I think the opportunity for those markets, as compared to, for example, more mature and stable markets like in Europe and maybe North America and Canada, for example, is there's an advantage in terms of the cost of labor. There's an advantage in the terms of cost of real estate. So that can create an attractive opportunity for a brand and for the local parties looking to expand through a franchise model. But there are also some headwinds in certain countries, in particular some of the more attractive countries like Brazil, like Argentina, where it's not necessarily a user-friendly regulatory environment. Brazil in particular has a lot of regulation. Argentina can be very difficult for foreign brands looking in. When I look at Brazil and the level of taxes, it's almost punitive when you're looking at outbound remission of royalty payments, for example. The taxes can approach up to 40%. And that really puts pressure on the business model and on the economic model of franchising when you've got franchisees paying royalties who either have to bear that tax or shift the burden to the franchisor. So that can be problematic. A lot of these countries, too, have currency control regimes, which also create problems for foreign brands that are looking at the market. So I think there are some things where some local governments can really look at how can we make things easier for foreign brands and make our markets more attractive, and then really play to their strength and market the fact that we've got a burgeoning and growing middle class, and at this point, focus your dollars here because you can get more bang for your buck when it comes to labor and real estate, and really grow your system in our market and grow with our economy. And I think that's probably the focus that they need to have.
Thank you, Kevin. This is super helpful, and I think it complements really well with the comments that Ximena had brought up earlier. And throughout this interview, I mean, I've learned a lot about the specific model of franchising as a mode of entry into a new market from a client's perspective, but also from the local government's perspective. What are some of the things they could be working on to make their countries more attractive? And very much to your point, Kevin, I think something that we do a lot at the center is put Latin America in a global context. So, and to ensure that there is competitiveness in our region from a regulatory and other perspective to make it attractive enough from a brand's perspective, that's absolutely important. And I think perhaps one additional point I'll make just to connect something something you said with what Ximena said. I think there's an opportunity when we look at a regional scalability perspective. There is a shared language across many countries. Of course, different cultures have to be cognizant of that, but I think there's a critical opportunity if a brand is able to translate itself successfully into one of the entry points in the region. There's an opportunity when we think about the middle class expanding not just within the specific countries, but across the country, across the region, through different countries. And just to thank you again, it was great to have we started off with some of the more macro level questions and then ended up with very specific recommendations. These practical insights have always been very helpful through these experts videos and other content we produce. And it's just always a pleasure to work with Baker McKenzie, a longstanding partner of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, on some of these issues, and the practical insights that you bring from your day-to-day work, working with the clients. That's been absolutely critical. And then we look forward to the opportunity to working with you guys again on this issue. And thank you again, Kevin Maher and Ximena Couret from Baker McKenzie Dallas office, specifically working on franchising issues. And I think there's a great opportunity to invest in Latin America through franchising. We've seen some opportunities, we've seen some challenges, and we look forward to continuing having this conversation.
Thank you, Pepe.
Thank you.